Listen to part of a lecture about early flight efforts.
Human beings have dreamed about flight for ages, probably since the first time our ancestors looked up into the sky and saw birds flying overhead. As you might expect, early attempts at flying focused on recreating the wings and flapping motion of birds. But people quickly realized that human beings could not fly by imitating birds. Maybe the first realistic step toward fulfilling man's desire to fly occurred when the Chinese discovered the kite that could fly in the air in 400 BC. First, kites were used for religious purposes, but soon they were also used for diversion and scientific research, like testing weather conditions.
Wow, that's long before Leonardo da Vinci drew those famous flying machines.
Yes, indeed. You could say that kites were important forerunners to those balloons and gliders in the mid-18th century, which enabled man to finally fly. But that doesn't mean people didn't try to fly until the 1700s. Like Tom had said, Leonardo da Vinci drew more than 100 sketches that illustrated his theories on flight, and it is assumed that he made the first real studies of flight in the 1480s.
But Professor, I always thought that the Wright brothers were the ones who flew for the first time.
Well, they did fly for the first time, with a very primitive form of airplane, but people made various efforts to fly after Leonardo da Vinci, and after many unsuccessful efforts, people were finally able to invent machines that allowed them to fly like the Wright brothers did. And like most of you, many people believed that human beings did not begin flying until the 20th century, when aviation pioneers completed short flights with very simple aircrafts. However, we should remember a true pioneer in flight like George Cayley, who was a prolific English engineer. Scholars almost unanimously consider him the first true scientific aerial investigator and first person to understand the underlying principles and forces of flight. George Cayley worked to discover a way that man could fly. He designed many different versions of gliders that used the movements of the body to control the plane. For over 50 years, he made improvements to the gliders. He changed the shape of the wings so that the air would flow over the wings correctly. He designed a tail for the gliders to help with the stability. He tried a biplane design to add strength to the glider. He also recognized that there would be a need for power if the flight was to be in the air for a long time. Obviously, however, gliders could not be developed as an effective form of air travel.
Is that why balloons were developed around this time, Professor?
That's right. People were flying in balloons and airships long before the first airplane. The first recorded instance of human flight took place in 1783 with the invention of the hot air balloon. The balloon, which was powered by a wood fire, traveled for about 5 miles before it went down. Unfortunately, the balloon was not steerable, so there was no way to control the direction it traveled. Inventors came up with many different ways to try to steer balloons, including sails, paddles, and flapping wings, but nothing worked until the propeller was used. Other improvements soon followed, and balloon and airship flights became much more common. In 1852, a steam engine allowed an airship to fly for 17 miles. The first gasoline-powered airship was flown in 1898. These advances led to the creation of the first rigid airship in 1900. Moreover, almost all airships were inflated with hydrogen, which was inexpensive to use. Hydrogen is lighter than air and gives airships the necessary lift they need to rise into the air. Unfortunately, hydrogen is also extremely dangerous and flammable. For example, the explosion of the Hindenburg Zeppelin in 1937 resulted in the loss of 35 lives. Since then, helium has been used as the preferred gas to inflate airships. Helium is less effective than hydrogen in creating lift, but it does not burn or explode like hydrogen.
Professor, how come we don't use these airships for transportation anymore?
Well, up until the 1940s, airships were used to carry passengers all around the world, but they experienced a huge drop in popularity after World War II because of several airship explosions, and because they could not compete with airplane technology. Today, airships are primarily used for advertising, weather monitoring, and television broadcasting.
Now get ready to answer the questions. You may use your notes to help you answer. 40. What is the talk mainly about? 41. Listen again to part of the lecture, then answer the question.
You could say that kites were important forerunners to those balloons and gliders in the mid-18th century, which enabled man to finally fly. But that doesn't mean people didn't try to fly until the 1700s.
What does the professor imply when he says this?
But that doesn't mean people didn't try to fly until the 1700s.
"42. According to the professor, what do scholars think of George Cayley? 43. According to the professor, what are two improvements made in airship technology? 44. Indicate whether each sentence below describes a characteristic of hydrogen gas or helium gas. 45. What does the professor imply about airships?